of the book club in fall of 2022 with Jessica Wang, who was the other co-facilitator. I was a participant in the book club when Jennifer Parada facilitated with Jamie. I teach in the history program, and there's somebody in the waiting room, and I'm happy to be here. Thanks for joining us.
And I'll go next. And I'm Antoinette Lee, and I'm my pronouns are she, her. And I was actually a participant in the workshop March 10th, 2022. And I'm excited to be here. And I'm the Nursing Dean in Health Sciences, Education and Wellness Institute.
We have a couple of presenters joining us from Zoom. So Catherine, do you want to introduce yourself next?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Catherine Medbury-Olison. I am in the Communication Studies Department, and I participated in the book club during the winter 2022 quarter as well. It's nice to be here with you.
Hi, it's Matt Edwards here, part-time faculty in the Communication Studies Department. I was also in this book club in the winter of 2022. Thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. I'm Leo Corella, he, him pronouns, psychology department. I participated in fall of 2022.
Thanks, everyone. Here we go. Okay, so just a quick agenda for all of our attendees. Jackie and I are going to do a very brief introduction to the equity-centered trauma-informed education framework, because obviously the presenters know what the framework is, but I think some of you joining us don't. So we don't just want to randomly start sharing information with you without having some background. Then is really where we get into the good stuff, which is each of the presenters are going to share with you all how we've incorporated the framework into our practices. So we'll see example assignments, applications to content, some policies, and some grading approaches. And then if time permits, we will have a short Q&A for any lingering questions. All right. So I'll get us started in talking about the equity-centered trauma-informed education framework. So this framework was developed by educator and teacher Alex Chevron-Bennett. Alex has a background in community college education as well as K through 12 education. And she really wanted to come up with a framework because she had noted a lot of trends in like trauma-informed education, but to her, the trauma-informed education that has become mainstream was missing something really important, which was centering equity into the actual practices of trauma-informed education. She gives a lot of examples throughout her writing where she talks about how some schools would claim that they were trauma-informed, but educators or leaders at those schools would like never want to talk about race or like any other issue that was actually impacting students and possibly perpetuating harm. And so I'm going to share with you the 6 principles that she highlights in her book that are related to this framework. I'm just going to post all of them like on the screen. But one of the first principles is that equity-centered trauma-informed education is anti-racist and anti-oppressive. So again, from her perspective, a lot of the things that have been missing from traditional trauma-informed education has been the centering of racial equity. And so we have to have an understanding of like what it means to be anti-racist within education, especially given like the historical harm that education, both K through 12 and higher education, have caused a lot of students from marginalized communities. A second principle is that equity-centered trauma-informed education is asset-based. So we are really focused on the inherent skills that our students bring to us rather than focusing on their deficits and them being punished by those deficits. If any of you are familiar with Yoso's cultural wealth model, it's very much rooted in that same principle, right, of looking at cultural wealth and assets that our students bring to us. The third principle is that this framework is systems oriented. This is really looking at big picture items like policies and structural changes. Similar to racism, right? It's not just about the interpersonal interactions, it's really systemic. And so what systems are in place at our schools that perpetuate harm to our students, and how do we change those systems? Equity-centered trauma-informed education is also human-centered, right? So looking at our students as whole people, not just a number or a person in our classroom, but realizing that they have complex histories and lives that they're coming to us, and honoring that within our classroom and within our schools. It is also proactive and universal. I know a lot of you are probably familiar with the universal design principles for learning. So similar idea here, right? Under UDL, if we center UDL principles, it really benefits all students. So equity-centered trauma-informed practices support students who may not be trauma affected or may not be as trauma affected as some of our more impacted students. And then finally, this framework is social justice oriented. So a lot of it, when it comes to our role as educators or leaders within education, is really how do we help our students become empowered and really liberate themselves in their community. I really like this quote from Vanette's book, which is, the goal of trauma-informed education is not to need trauma-informed education, right? So how do we empower our students so that when they leave our institution, they become the change makers in their community to stop some of these systems of harm. So I know that's a lot. And Vanette gives us some really practical principles on how to apply trauma-informed education. Again, we won't go into these in detail, but I'll leave these up on the slide. So she encourages shifting from more of a reactive stance to a proactive approach, right? So currently we tend to intervene with trauma impacted students after the fact, so after harm has been done. But again, a lot of harm still happens within our schools. And so how do we prevent some of that from happening? Shifting from a deficit or savior mentality to more of a unconditional positive regard, which is again, thinking of our students from having from a stance of them having inherent value and inherent skills, and also shifting our role as educators to connection makers rather than being like the sole savior of our students. And then shifting from implementing trauma-informed practices across school policies. Again, this is the more systems-oriented approach. And then the final piece is empowering our students to be change makers within their community. So I'm really excited for what our presenters will share with us, because I think all of our examples sort of hit on all of these 4 shifts. So Jackie's going to give us a little bit more information on what our presentations will be like today, and then we can get onto hearing about what we've done.
Some examples, yeah.
Yes.
So I'll be really brief here, but what we ended up doing in organizing the showcase is dividing our examples up by 3 general types of work that we do as faculty on campus. We're going to begin with policies and grading. I tried to get like an overall quote from Vanette for each of these that kind of summarizes her take on these particular aspects of our work. So for policies and grading, Vanette writes, equity at the center means always asking, does this practice, policy, or decision help or harm students from marginalized communities? Because the same factors that cause inequity, for example, bias and discrimination, also cause trauma. We can't unlink the two. For all of these 3 different areas that we're going to talk about today, Vanette asks that we consider how we're fostering 4 things in our work for our students: predictability, flexibility, connection, and empowerment. And these are connected to the shifts that Jennifer just introduced to us. I also, we're not going to do that one right now. Here we go. This is all I wanted. I took this chart basically that's in the book and I put it into a slide. And you all could do this on your own, where you consider the strengths and as well as challenges or opportunities for growth in these different aspects of your work. So we're going to talk about policies first, then we're going to talk about curriculum, and then we're going to end with talking about mentorship. And so you can think about how you apply these 4 principles to your own work. And I'm going to save this for later. So let's talk about policies and grading. And Catherine, I think you are going first in this segment. Is that right?
That sounds right. Thanks, Jackie.
Yes.
All right, let me go ahead and share my slides here.
I'm going to unshare, Catherine, and you should be able to share your, oh, there we go.
Okay, does that work?
Awesome.
Yes, that's great.
Great. So I want to give an example of how I really shifted my late work policy, and I even actually shifted the name of it. And so I will say that I was already thinking about this, and in our department over the last couple of years, we've taken some time to look at policies that we weren't really happy with for a variety of reasons. Often because we thought they were causing barriers for our students or creating barriers. And so I happened to be thinking about this already around the same time that I was part of this book club, and they really paired nicely, right? That conversation at the department level and the concepts from the book. And so I actually even shifted from calling it a late work policy to being labeled as submitting assignments and quizzes on time. So let me give you an example of what this was like. And it had been this way for years, right? This is something from a syllabus from 2018, but I could go back, another decade and it was probably exactly the same. Essentially telling students they needed to submit things. And I certainly was letting them know that they had deadlines that were available throughout the quarter and everything was available from day one. And yet I still had this idea in here that if they didn't turn something in on time, they were going to be assessed an academic penalty, which I have here. A late written assignment, right, was going to receive a 1-point grade deduction for every full day that it was late, and that late quizzes will not be accepted. So that had been my policy, as I said, for years. And I think it's a pretty common one. But I really started to reflect on this and realized I had a lot of concerns with my own policy. It was not accurate, it was not equitable, and it wasn't consistent with other messages that I was giving my students. So in terms of not being accurate, in practice, I wasn't penalizing my students. I'm really quite flexible and was really wanting them to communicate with me, and I wasn't penalizing them. And so it really was, like I said, not accurate. It also wasn't equitable. So I recognize that it's culturally and socially inappropriate for some of our students to challenge a policy or even approach a professor and ask for an extension or exception, particularly when there is a very specific policy that said that they need to do certain things, right? And I realized it was really privileging students who approached me about submitting work after the deadline or who missed a quiz for whatever reason. And I started asking myself, who isn't reaching out to me? Who isn't being included here? And I didn't like that. And I wanted to address that. It also, as I mentioned, was not consistent with other messages I was giving my students and have for years. I'm really open with them about recognizing that their lives are really full. And I always like to tell them that life doesn't happen on a quarter system. Things happen, right? And I get that. And so on one hand, I was saying this, and then I had this policy that didn't really reflect that. So I started thinking about some of these concepts from Vennett's book. The question that Jackie just mentioned, does this policy cause harm? And then this idea of unconditional positive regard, which I absolutely love, right? That idea that a student has value. And so from that, I realized I want to really clearly communicate to my students that I trust them. And at the end of the day, I want them to learn how to be effective communicators, right? And so one way they can do this is by approaching me, hopefully proactively, about needing an extension, for instance, or letting me know that something is going on. So I rewrote this, and now, as I mentioned, it's submitting assignments and quizzes on time instead of a late work policy. And in the end, I let them know if you're having trouble meeting a deadline, please contact me so that we can make a plan together. And I think it's been pretty well received. What I've learned from this is that students really appreciate that I'm recognizing their life situations and things happen, right? Students are overwhelmingly completing work on time. And when they're not able to do so, they're more proactively communicating with me. And so I think some of it's this policy along with another assignment that I've added. But I think there's more consistency from me. And I think that's encouraging that communication. The interesting thing is, though, some students still think there is a penalty. This is a message I got just a couple of weeks ago from a student letting me know what was going on very proactively, but then saying that they realized that there would be a point deduction, right? I say nothing about points being taken off. So I realize I need to change that a little bit more and explicitly state that or rephrase that in some ways, perhaps, or communicate in another way. But overall, I've been really pleased with this adjustment that I've made. And I think that students have been as well. So thanks for letting me share that example.
So
Will you share your screen?
yes, I think I am.
Jackie will give us our next example, which is also under this policy and gradings theme.
And it's also a lay policy. So we decided to give two examples of one policy type okay, that's perfect. Kind of where Catherine is, which is I gave my students the opportunity to ask for extensions at any point. But I realized after doing this for a couple of years that it was the same students who were asking me for extensions, but then others were not asking for extensions, but still turning things in late. And my current policy is if you turn something in late without asking for an extension, you aren't going to get full points. So I'm not as generous as Catherine that way, where I just automatically give you the full points no matter what. So I was thinking to myself, even though I have this policy where folks can ask for an extension, some people are not. And why is that? And I decided to take a couple of actions to try to eliminate what I think might be the issue, some of what Catherine was just describing, that some students don't feel comfortable asking, especially if they think that the policy is that they can't turn things in late. So one thing I decided to do is to just normalize extensions. So this is from my syllabus, and I just started off by saying we all need extra work sometimes. Even your professors have asked for extensions on our own work. It is completely normal to do this. Do not feel uncomfortable if you need extra time for something. I also then tried to reinforce the idea that I will accept extension requests by, in my syllabus exam, giving a question with a drop down. What should you do if you need more time for an assignment? Request an extension. And then using the form on our Canvas homepage actually relates to the last thing I decided to do, which is to make extensions even more accessible. So what I wanted to do is sort of avoid the email part, although I love that Catherine does that. She's teaching a communications class, so students are building skills for the class and reaching out to her. But what I realized is students feel when they send me an email that they need to give me all the reasons why they need an extension. I'm getting way too much personal information from students. And it's also, it can be a lot of emails to juggle sometimes too. So I'm going to try to switch screens here. Did that work? Oh yeah, good. Okay. So just to show you what I did, I built an extension request form into my Canvas homepage. So students can click on request an extension, and then it takes them to this form where they just put in their name, the course they're in, the assignment that they want the extension on, and when they can have the assignment completed. Once they submit it, I get an email in Outlook telling me that I have a new form submitted. I can open it, get all the information. And what I do here, I say that once the request is submitted, I'm either going to apply the extension request or reach out to you within 1 business day. So as long as the request falls within the parameters of the course, I just automatically make the change in Canvas. I don't even reach out to the student, it's just done. But if it doesn't apply to the parameters of the course, if they want like an extra 2 weeks for something and that's not going to fit with our timeline, then I'll reach out to them and say, hey, I can't give you 2 weeks, but here's this other extension. Why don't you and I meet during student hours to talk about why you need 2 extra weeks for this? what I found is way more students are asking for extensions with this policy. And it's much easier for me to juggle because I don't have to answer all the emails. And in fact, when they submit this form on the weekend, I can just see, oh, I got a request and I just applied over the weekend. And then I don't feel like I'm like having to answer all the weekend emails, if that makes sense. So I think overall it's worked well. But I do want to enforce it even more by asking students to submit a request as part of the syllabus exam as a practice, because sometimes students still say, I can't find the form. And so, yeah, I wanted to share another example of a late policy form that I think fits with Fennett's framework. And I'll stop sharing now. And Antoinette, you are actually next.
All righty. Well, this is actually, we're learning quite a bit right now. I'm loving this. So I enjoyed the class very much, and it was in winter quarter 2022, or March 10th to be exact, when I actually did my final assignment. And what I did is I looked at a policy in our program that was averaging test scores. So in our program, you have to have a 78% to pass the course, and there's no rounding of any test scores. But what they were doing is they were taking the exams, averaging them, and if they didn't get 78%, then nothing else in the course counted. So let's say there was a 10% presentation or a 10% project. It didn't count if they didn't get the 78%. So I realized this wasn't trauma informed, and it was causing a lot of stress to a lot of students who spend years and years doing prerequisites to get into the program. And then to realize that everything could change with the averaging of their test scores. So if someone had a bad day on test one, and for whatever reason, they have to almost do a stellar job for the rest of the test for that quarter to even get that 78%. So what I did was took an example where I averaged some test scores, exact same test scores, and the student basically didn't pass the course. I then took it where everything counted within the course, and they passed the course, still at the 78%. So what I realized is that the policy was not trauma informed. And so what I did was reflection questions. I'm really sorry to do a PowerPoint, but I'd be more than happy to give access to anybody to what I wrote up and everything. So in the assignment from the book that we use, there were reflection questions. And one of them was, what are the philosophical assumptions behind this policy? And so the policy with exam average is calculated. And my question was, what does it mean to average the exam score? Is this meant to motivate the students to succeed? Does this cultivate unconditional positive regard? And multiple choice or fill in the blank test, there could be faulty tests, and they need to pass this test to be successful and be a nurse. So a lot of people know that if they don't pass a course, it delays the progression in the program. And now we have a policy where if they don't pass the first quarter, that they have one chance to re-enter the program or they're out. So again, I was thinking this is really not trauma informed, because people know, according to the student handbook, that they have one chance to re-enter the program if they don't pass the first course in the program. So another question asked, does this policy run the risk of being inequitable enforced based on implicit or explicit bias or individual teachers or administrators? So the policy, again, the exams has to be higher at 78 or higher for them to get calculate the course grade. So my question was, could this be a bias against a student who's not test well or feels safe asking for help? And I love the two examples earlier about students who are reaching out about the late policy, but who wasn't reaching out. So the same thing as a student is really struggling after that first test, but they don't tell anybody because maybe English is not their first language. Maybe they have trouble with standardized tests. The other thing is this policy human-centered. And you remember all the principles that were put up earlier during this presentation. And is this policy equitable? What about other assignments like class projects or group work? So in other words, some students excel other ways. I call them classroom assessment techniques, or CATs, because I love CATs. I'm so glad to have that classroom assessment technique. Anyway, but there are more than one way to basically assess whether or not a student knows the material. And we're heavily based off exams. I understand that they sit for a national exam, which will be, a written test, but there's still other ways to get there to prepare them for it. So, and I ask, because students benefit from test prep by talking about rationales like test blueprint or being mindful of concepts. So that was the other thing. Another question that came up was, what cultural values and norms are expressed in this policy? Are there assumptions of what is good, bad, appropriate, inappropriate in this policy? And what I came up with, the exam could be written from a perspective that is not meaningful or relevant to the student, and is high stakes testing, which causes test anxiety. Again, if they can't get the 78% average on their exams, nothing else counts and they can't progress in that course. So I'll stop there. So what I did was, we do everything in what's called an SBAR type when we present issues, and that stands for situation, background, assessment, and recommendation. So I actually put together a proposal, and I'll have to read you my cool little SBAR real quickly. What time?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
I wrote it out.
Is it okay?
Yes. Okay. And they can see it on the screen then.
You can start telling me
Okay.
about it and I'll.
So my S was students that failed courses in our program for the past 2 academic years. 8 students failed winter quarter 2023, and that is the largest number of failures I have seen since being here. And when I say since being here, I came on board to Bellevue College in August of 2021. I'm concerned that averaging of exam scores is setting up a barrier to completion in our program. So that was the situation. The background was, many years ago, a curriculum committee came up with the current grading policy of averaging all exam scores and only counting the rest of the course assessments if a student received the minimum of 78% after averaging. So my assessment was, this policy has not been re-examined in many years to see if student anxiety can be decreased or if it is trauma informed. Does this policy follow best practice of equity-centered trauma-informed education? Are we providing adequate remediation and support for all students? So my recommendation was to eliminate averaging of exam scores fall quarter 2023 and let 9% of the grade be exams and 10% other. The passing grade would remain 70% with no rounding. And then I just said, please see attached documents for examples. So what I did is I gave them oh, thank you. Yes, oh, I love it. So what you can see on the screen here is, this was the example that I gave. And you can see on the right, I did just what they did. And actually, this is the actual student scores and the averaging. And then you do it over on the other side and they pass the course. So the thing is that what people focused on when this policy came forward, are we okay with a student getting 65%? Again, I was saying it may be a bad day for that student. They may be having a hard time. We don't really know why they get 65%, but we don't do remediation or have a test blueprint or talk about rationales. How we know why they got a 65 so they can get better. And so these were some test scores. But if you notice, the only test score that is exam 1 is under 78%. So you can see, like I said, if you have a bad day on that first test, you're really, I won't use that word, you're disenfranchised for the rest of the quarter. And you can see with these other test scores, they were all passing test scores. So I am happy to say that it did pass. There was a lot of discussion about it, but this policy did get passed, and we will be eliminating averaging of test scores come fall quarter 2023.
That's great.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's kind of unbelievable that they're doing other work and it's not factored in at all.
And I was having students come to me time after time complaining about this, saying we just feel on edge. It's hard enough coming to the program, but this is one more stressor we have over our head.
Mm-hmm. And maybe they'll do better on the exams when the pressure is
Mhm.
taken off a little bit.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's great.
Awesome. We really loved Antoinette's example because it is that systems approach, right? This will impact the entire nursing program at Bellevue College. And it's related to grading, which I think is something that impacts it does impact all of our students and all of us as faculty. So thank you so much, Antoinette, for
you're
doing the work. Cool. Am I next? Who's next?
Oh, let's check our schedule for Matt.
Oh, Matt is
is
next. Okay. So I'm gonna.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Matt.
Hi,
Hi,
Matt.
Matt.
Hi. I appreciate the opportunity to share how I've incorporated this framework into my teaching practices as well. I'd like to briefly describe one change I made in my policies after participating in this book club, which was fantastic. One of the courses I often teach is CMST 250, that is called Communicating in a Diverse Workplace. This course applies communication concepts and theory in an organizational setting. We also talk about topics such as leadership, teamwork, and conflict management. In this particular class, students complete a number of different discussion boards throughout the quarter. Students answer a variety of questions in detail, along with responding to at least 2 fellow classmates. Previously, I had stressed a zero tolerance policy for any inappropriate or disrespectful behavior or comments on these discussion boards. But after taking this workshop, we learned a lot about the benefits of restorative approaches. This can include reducing social barriers to learning, engaging more students, valuing diversity, and nurturing a sense of belonging. This also includes applying unconditional positive regard, which you've heard from some of the other presenters today as well, along with connection making. After finishing this workshop, I did reflect on whether the consequences helped repair the relationship in community, or if they were simply a punishment for breaking class rules. So instead of a zero tolerance policy, I have softened the language to provide a more flexible and restorative approach. There is more of a focus now on accountability to the wider community as compared to just the rules themselves. I feel like this also provides students an opportunity to repair their relationship instead of being just punished for breaking class rules. The enforcement of this policy also includes conversations, which provides students with a clear process for appeal as well. Overall, it's my objective after taking this workshop to provide opportunities for students to go through a process of self-reflection and critical thinking, which I feel is incredibly important for our students, and also helping them with their overall learning process, not just in my class, but in other classes that they're taking at Bellevue College. I also strive to create a sense of belonging and community in my classes. I also strive to help in the development and creation of positive and mutually beneficial relationships with all my students. And lastly, I try to create a psychologically safe environment that allows my classes and myself to have challenging conversations about topics that come up in our classes, things such as race, discrimination, culture, and identity, while also encouraging students to have an open dialogue that will celebrate various perspectives and experiences. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Matt. I'm going to go back to sharing our PowerPoint slide.
So the one that I skipped last time.
Okay.
Perfect. Oh.
There you
This-
go.
okay. I'm not going to go through and read all of these to you, but I did find some additional examples that I think were really helpful from Bennett that spoke to specifically to policies and grading. We can share these slides with all of the attendees today. So we'll make note of who's here and send this out to you. But you'll see there's a lot of things that we've talked about. Matt was just talking about getting rid of a zero tolerance behavior policy. Bennett writes about that. And she also talks about trying to do systems-wide work. And she says, remember, we can only start within our spheres of influence and work to grow that sphere, which is why we're so happy that we have this example of systems-wide change as well. But anyway, we have these on the slide that you can take a look at more closely yourself later.
Yes.
And now we're going to switch to our second type of work in our work, which is curriculum. And so we're going to talk a bit about assignments and content. Bennett says in particular that curriculum violence is the result of classroom content and pedagogy that harms students intellectually and emotionally. And she asks us to consider how to incorporate trauma prevention into our curriculum. And we have some examples of assignments and content in which faculty have done these things. And Jennifer, you are our first example.
Okay, so I'm going to share, I actually go twice in this theme, but the first example that I want to share is of a studies strategies reflection assignment that I had students in my fully online introduction to physiological psychology class do. This class is challenging, if you can't tell by the name, but historically in psychology programs, the physiology class as well as the research methods class tend to evoke the most anxiety in students. For my class, adding the layer of it being fully online can also be really anxiety provoking to students. Oftentimes students will tell me, right, that they haven't ever performed well in science classes. They're not a science person. And so part of my goal in this class is to really shatter those long held beliefs that my students have had, because they are science people. But something that I want to highlight that is related to the equity-centered framework is that then it discusses that our goal as faculty is really to be connection makers with our students, right? Oftentimes, I think we feel a lot of pressure, especially when our students come to us, especially if they're disclosing something really difficult. We might feel like we're the only ones that can help them, but that isn't always useful, right? Falling into that mindset isn't useful, and getting our students the support that they need at that point in time. And so one thing that I do, again, really early on in this class, they have to do this assignment during our Getting Started module. And I'll show you the actual assignment, but really the highlights of how I'm connecting this to equity-centered trauma-informed education is that I'm already connecting them hopefully to a couple of on-campus services. And I'm also explicitly letting them know that I care about their wellness. Wellness is a central aspect of the content of that class. But from the very beginning, I really want them to know that I want them to be as successful as they can in my class, not just academically, but also within their well-being. So I'm going to switch to my Canvas site, and I'm going to show you what the full assignment looks like. Give me just 1 second. Okay. I'm going to go into student view because, oh, never mind. I can't do that. All right, we'll stay in instructor view. But again, this is part of our Getting Started module. So they do this on week 1. Also, since Jessica is here, she taught me everything I know about City Lab. So my class looks really good because of her. But again, in this class, because it's a fully online class, I just have them read a couple of, it's this one article that talks about how to be a successful online student. I've also had my past Psych 202 students write letters for future students. And so I have them read that because, again, they're walking into this really scary online class. And my past students, right, because of hindsight bias at the end of the quarter, they're like, oh, this class isn't too bad. Here are some tips. So, again, just making sure that they are thinking about success. This is the part where I try to connect them to, I actually made a significant change to this assignment. I'm showing you last quarter's shell. This Canvas guide is now optional just because I think a lot of our students, because of the past couple of years in online instruction, are really comfortable with Canvas. So I've been finding that not a lot of them, learn new things by having them look through these Canvas guides. So now step 2 of this assignment is learning about Bellevue College support services. So I have them pick one of the following and spend, a couple minutes reading about the service, learning about why students might use this service, how they can set up appointments, etc. And then down here, they just reflect on what they learned. And this is the bonus resource that helps them think about their wellness. It's an emergency self-care plan. So whenever I teach this class in person, we actually do this emergency self-care plan in person, but it's a little bit more challenging online. But really, this is having students pause and think about, when we're under a lot of stress, which can happen at any time throughout the quarter, what are some things that we can turn to? So for example, right, what are some things that can help them relax? What do they like to do when they're in a good mood? What can they do throughout the day that is going to ensure that they're feeling really good about themselves? And then down here is that social connection part, right? So who can they turn to if they're really struggling? So is this a best friend, a sibling, a parent, anyone in their life? And then, down here, I should say, right, I teach psychology, so we do talk a lot about, how our brain oftentimes has us fall into automatic negative thoughts. And so this is kind of showing them how some of our content applies to real life. So yeah, that is one example again of how I try to connect my students really early on to student support services, but also thinking about how they can care for themselves throughout the quarter. Thanks for listening.
Your camera sites are so pretty. Catherine, I have you next on the schedule for our next example of a curriculum shift.
Excellent. Okay, so the example I want to provide for this is a discussion board prompt that I have adjusted, and I've added a couple of more options. So in interpersonal communication, that's one of the classes I teach, I have several goals for students. One is I want to have a variety of prompts for students that allow them to choose their own level of vulnerability and disclosure, if any. So for discussion board prompts for every chapter, I provided variety of options, right? Some could be really much more personal, a personal reflection about a concept, applying to a scenario, or thinking about some specific course concept or theory. And so I felt like I already had that available, right? That a student could make a choice about what they wanted to share and what they were comfortable with sharing publicly. They do a lot of other reflections that only I see, but this is specific to the discussion boards. I also really had a goal of wanting them to draw more on their own strengths and their own cultural capital when it comes to effective interpersonal communication in their relationships. So I focus a lot on students identifying strengths and areas for improvement, and then thinking about tools that we learn about in class to make improvements in their relationships. So hoping again that they're leading to healthier relationships and higher degrees of relational satisfaction in those relationships. I also want to invite students to draw on those strengths, to share those experiences with their classmates, again, on their own terms, if they so choose in those public discussions. Because my hope was that, students can learn from their peers' experiences or insights or application of material. Maybe it'll give them some ideas. I also want students to know that they have value, right? So back to that unconditional positive regard idea, and they have the capacity to problem solve, to enhance or make improvements in their relationships. So again, they're learning about different tools in our classes. And then I want them to really realize that they can implement those tools, right? And have a real benefit. And so again, this is rooted in the concept of unconditional positive regard, which I mentioned earlier, and then also this idea of empowerment. This idea of I love this Bennett quote, by empowerment, I don't mean simply feeling good about oneself. Rather, true empowerment is claiming and using one's power. And our students' lives are full of rich areas for exploration and real problems to solve. So again, drawing on that idea that they are facing challenges in their relationships. They want to make improvements in their various relationships, whether it's a personal relationship or a work relationship. And how do we equip them to recognize that they can do that and empower them to do that with the tools we're learning about in class? So what I did was I added a couple of discussion board questions early in the quarter, and one specifically including this Bennett quote about unconditional positive regard, and really encouraging students to think about how they saw this concept applying to their own relationships, and then thinking about the topics that they were most looking forward to in our class. And then second of all, this idea of looking at their uniquely interpersonal relationships, a concept in our field, and thinking about, what their strengths are and how they might draw on those to improve those relationships. So again, rooting a couple of discussion board questions in some of these concepts that Bennett has introduced in this book. And that's my example. So thanks for letting me share that one.
That's really cool. Thank you. Y'all are giving me so many ideas. All right, Leo, you are next. Assignments and content.
Well, okay, let's see here. Can you all see that okay?
Yes.
Yeah, it's so great to hear everybody's ideas because I'm jotting them down. So I'm realizing there's so many things I want to add. I guess for me, it was focused around my 260 class, which is psychosocial issues in healthcare. That's with the nursing students. So, having taken the class in the book club in fall, that was a class just felt like it was I don't want to say the easiest, but the content just relates, it overlaps so much. We talk about trauma, we talk about power, and specifically in healthcare. And trauma-informed care is actually like a concept like embedded in the course. So to take it a step further, I thought I'd start actually with a couple of things I changed up in how we read our core content. So we don't have a textbook. We read Cass by Wilkerson, and we read The Death Gap by Ansel. And I was a lot more flexible than I normally am. They're responsible for reading all of both texts. But I thought to myself, do I really need that as a deliverable? And so what I did was I divided them into 8 groups, and I gave them sections of each of the book that they were going to present. And it really got away from like, do they really need to write an APA style paper on this? Because if they do, it becomes that kind of work they have to do that they may not want. They already have to do that for me anyways. But I made it something that I think what it was a little more collective, communal, and lower stakes. And so we did, and it was great because group 1 went, and then group 2 went, and then we could each kind of reflect back on how each of them kind of were understanding the material, struggling with material. So for those of you, if you've read Cass, it's a history book. So for some of them, they're super into the history and like, oh yeah, I know about, 19th century, and others like, this is not stuff I've thought about at all. Furthermore, there were several students that have either a partner that was from India or they themselves were from India and talked about the caste system and how they felt like it did or did not map onto U.S. history. So that was just a really fun exercise. The Death Gap we've been using for, 3 or 4 years now. And that one also, it's dense with facts, which is great. That's kind of the whole point of the book, is to look at social justice empirically. But also same thing, I realized I can get away from being like, they need to give me this amount of facts to show me they've gotten the book. It's more they're in dialogue with it. The main thing I wanted to discuss, though, was I tried to modify their capstone project, their final project. And this is, so I have screenshots of some of their PowerPoints. There's one more here somewhere. Oh, maybe I don't have it in there. Okay, well, that's okay. I'll share about it. But essentially, 2 groups really, I thought, did an outstanding job with this. So the quarter ends with them. So originally, let me go back real quick. Originally, when we were like sort of designing the class and psych department and nursing department was maybe including a little bit that there is, and maybe I'm sort of making up the term, but like a healthcare industrial complex, right? I mean, just like with any other industry, we're invested in people not being well, invested in an industry that doesn't empower people. Even though we're trying to offer people care, we're invested in them being sick. So one of the ways that we tried to originally put in this course was focusing on wellness at the end, and that wellness is free, and wellness is not something that you even need a higher degree or anything for, right? It's for all people. So the mantra became a little more of like mindfulness as liberation. So they did things like they talk about psychedelics, they talk about support groups, yoga. I'm blanking on that. Fitness, music therapy, art therapy, but all practices which all people can engage with. And so one of the things that was really great was I thought the students actually, so I introduced their final project on wellness with sort of adding that component, like think about how this might affect marginalized communities, people of color. And they showed me some things that were really great that I didn't expect to get, which is great. For instance, I think they stressed how many of these wellness practices actually come from communities of color, how they come from marginalized communities, how they are examples of resistance to historical oppression. One in particular was they talked about mindfulness and like the self-immolation of Buddhist monks, right, in Asia. And this idea of like how mindfulness is not to pacify our minds or just to deal with super busy schedules, but are ways of focusing energy for social change. This was a student slide here, and this one here. So I was really just kind of impressed that like if you kind of sometimes just move paradigmatically towards a way of approaching a project, they'll give you more than you want. They even gave like an example of a meetup in Seattle that was a BIPOC event for mindfulness. So I just felt like the students really kind of went above and beyond. And I'm always impressed. I say this a lot, but I'm always impressed with nursing students because they'll do that. But just the example of how they will take that and then really kind of apply that kind of material. So the main focus again was empowerment and then change makers in the community. That was another one like I mentioned earlier, but like that the class could stress that more to them as nursing students. Thanks.
Thank you, Leo. Yeah. Again, if we're thinking about the shifts, right, that then it discusses, again, the ultimate shift is that we are equipping our students to be able to be change makers within their community, right? And I think Leo's project perfectly illustrates that. So thank you for sharing. Okay. I'm going again. Let's see. Okay, so I'm going to share another assignment, same class, Psych 202. And again, similar to Leo, right, I'm in the psychology department. So the content related to trauma that was present in the book is very much connected to the things we cover anyway in the class. So in Psych 202, we have an entire module on stress. And again, it's under this framework of what stress is doing to our brains and to our bodies and to our overall health. For those of you that know me, stress is also my area of research. So I have invested a lot into this little 1-week module. But one of the assignments that's part of this is a discussion board that I call Responding to Stress in America. This is actually the last iteration of this. I made changes for this quarter. But in this assignment, students have 2 options. The first option is to read a report by the American Psychological Association. It's their Stress in America report, which is an annual report. They survey, thousands of Americans, and they try to understand what are the top stressors. For years, well, since 2020, I've had them read the 2020 report, which in my opinion, is one of the most well-done reports thus far. I think it's better than the 2021 report, 2022 report. But again, at this point, it's a little dated, so I am going to have them switch over to the 2022 report. But again, this report does such a great job at discussing stress as a social justice issue, especially under the pandemic that we had been experiencing since 2020. So they have specific components of stressors that are specific to healthcare workers, stressors that are specific to, adolescents, to students, to people of color. So yeah, very well done. So anyway, they had the option of reading this report, or they could watch a TED Talk by Laura Vandernoot Lipsky, who I love. She is a local activist and worker. She's author of the book Trauma Stewardship. So her whole career has worked with people who are exposed to vicarious or secondary trauma. So these are like your trauma responders. And she actually includes teachers in her list of people that she works with, right? So she works with medical professionals, social workers, teachers, ecologists. So she, in this TED Talk, talks about her perspective on trauma and really centers the idea that those of us who are exposed to vicarious or secondary trauma, we need to be aware of the interconnectedness of the issues, right? So she talks about how it's an ecological issue, right? Human suffering impacts everything and everyone. And so she talks about that interconnectedness. So anyway, they, either read the report or watch this TED Talk, and then they respond to prompts accordingly, right? So if they looked at the report, I have them connected to class content, like is it, which of the stressors are acute, chronic, physical, psychological, both, etc. But if they're reading the report, something I really want them to hone in on is the recommendations that the APA puts forth. They're not the best. That's the one critique of this report. And I want them to use their own knowledge, their own experience living through the pandemic, their own experience being a student during the pandemic, being a worker, being a parent, and really tell me how they think our government or our schools should have responded. In 2020, it was really like, how should we be responding? But then I shifted the prompts into how do you wish people would have responded to all of these changes? And then if they're doing the TED Talk, same thing, right? So are the stressors that Laura's talking about acute, chronic, but something she emphasizes again is the ways that we cope with the suffering that we collectively experience. And so I have them review whether or not they themselves or someone that they know has experienced some of these coping mechanisms, right? So do they know anyone who copes through anger, cynicism, right? Through grieving, through lack of awe, through dissociation. So I have them self-reflect on whether they've seen some of this show up in their own community or in their lives.
I think someone.
Oh, I think that was me. Sorry, it was echoing for a second. My bad. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Okay, let's go back to this. Oh yeah, and then again here connecting it to our current moment, right? So Laura talks about being able to metabolize what we're bearing witness to. So again, here I ask them like, how can we metabolize what we're currently experiencing to be able to continue to show up for our community, for each other, for our families, etc. So yeah, and then they, and they share with us what they learned under each option. And I really appreciate this assignment. It's been a really great collective assignment where I've seen a lot of encouragement among students, right? Like they will, like if a student is a parent and they choose to do the report and share what it was like to be a parent at the height of the pandemic, you'll see like, people in the classroom supporting them and being like, oh my gosh, like you're awesome for doing all of this. And like, we're happy to have you in this class. And so I think overall it's been a really good community building experience where I'm allowing students space to process, again, a lot of the stressors and suffering that we've been encountering. So thank you for allowing me to share. Right, now we're on to our last segment. Hold on, sorry, I have to share my screen.
Thank you all for bearing with us with the tech.
Okay, these are all my slides that we don't.
Okay, so there's just,
Oh, sorry.
that's okay. There's just some additional parts of the book that we've highlighted if you want to take a look at these on your own, but a lot of this we've discussed. Catherine had the exact same quote about students' lives being rich, full of rich areas for exploration and real problems to solve. And so it's not just about making sure that you're not causing trauma in your materials and your curriculum, but also finding ways to empower students to be able to change the world so that we live in a more trauma-free place in the future. So last, we're going to talk about mentorship. And I think we've seen this quote already, but just as a reminder, Bennett wants us to shift from a savior mentality to unconditional positive regard, a mindset that focuses on the inherent skills, capacity, and value of every student. Educators shouldn't aim to heal, fix, or save, but to be connection makers and just one of many caring adults in a child's life. And I'm actually first for this one. And to be honest, I want to start by just saying that hearing these words changed my life. Just hearing the idea that I did not have to bear all of my students' burdens, but instead be one person in their life who can connect them to others who can support them in different ways, just completely changed the way that I approached my mentorship. And it felt like a huge weight lifted off my shoulders, and it's made me, I think, a better mentor, having this mindset that I am a connection maker instead of the person that has to fix my students when they come to me crying. And so it's been really helpful. But I do want to share something that is a little bit similar to Jennifer's earlier example, at least to start. No, that's okay. It lets me just kick you off. That's great. Okay, this isn't actually, there's too many windows open. There we go. Okay, so I just want to share with you some ways that I have tried to be more proactive. Again, being proactive versus reactive is important to the framework in connecting students to campus resources through different assignments in my class. One of them is the introduction assignment. So this is pretty similar to what Jennifer was talking about. And the other is a self-reflection assignment that I have them do in the middle of the quarter. And there's a lot to this. I'm not going to go through the whole entire assignment, but I just want to highlight a few questions that I ask students that I developed specifically to try to see if there are student needs that I'm unaware of. And so for the introduction, the questions I want to highlight include, tell me a little bit how you're going to be accessing our course. What technology will you be using? I use this question to refer students to our laptop loan program if they don't have access to reliable computer. I ask them what concerns they have about taking this class, and they'll often tell me, I'm afraid it's going to be too much work. I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to manage my time well. And this gives me an opportunity to address some of those concerns before they actually become an issue. And lastly, how can I help facilitate your learning in this course? I'm surprised by how many students in my asynchronous class tell me it'd be great if you could reach out to me sometimes just to see how I'm doing. And I make a note of that. And then I have this list of students who I will just randomly email now and again throughout the quarter and be like, how's it going? They want more individual attention than other students who are taking an asynchronous class because they don't want individual attention. So then the self-reflection assignment, I have them do middle of the quarter. I have them do it a little bit later in my asynchronous class because in asynchronous, I also have them come talk to me in an individual meeting. So then the self-reflection is a little bit later. But I asked them, why do you think you're succeeding on certain tasks in the course while finding others challenging, which will allow me to refer them to different resources if they're able to reflect on why some things might be harder. Some students tell me that once again, time management comes up a lot. And then I can meet with them, I can refer them to the resources. And lastly, just how are you doing as a human person trying to get through your daily tasks? How is it going? And I get a variety of answers to this. Students are amazingly candid with these assignments, and it's been really helpful in allowing me to connect them to various resources on campus and help them with my own expertise when I can. I also just want to go back to my Canvas site to show that I've changed some things on the left-hand toolbar. A lot of us have, the Academic Success Center, the Disability Resource Center, the Counseling Center. I created my own to link them to our website that just has all of our resources for students. Which our new website makes you scroll down a lot for everything nowadays. But so you can do, I just wanted to let you all know that you can do that. If there's different sites that you want students to have easy access to, you can create a new link on your left-hand toolbar. And so I've done that to try to make things a little bit more accessible. So yeah, one of the ways I've approached mentorship and just being one of many caring adults is to ask students in their assignments what they need and then try to connect them to resources when that happens. And
Matt is our final presenter.
Hello again. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Jackie. I'll be also talking a little bit about mentoring. I feel as educators, we have an obligation to develop and maintain healthy boundaries in our relationships with students. I feel like we should always strive to act professionally, ethically, and respect the privacy and confidentiality of our students as well. In my classes, I often have many students who are very new to the college, along with living in the United States. And I feel it's important to assist new international students in this transition that they're often going through from their respective countries to our university. And I strive to enhance this experience through personal interaction while creating an atmosphere of trust and mutual respect. To that end, at the beginning of each quarter, I've meet individually with multilingual students on a one-on-one basis. And I also need to consider, and this is something that we talked about in the workshop, whether any of these students are facing racism, bias, discrimination of any kind within the school setting, or maybe the outside community. As we know, these students are facing a variety of different challenges as they are assimilating into a new culture, a new college, and perhaps learning the language all at the same time. One thing that really resonated, in this workshop for me was being a connection maker. And that's kind of always this idea about looking for ways to connect our students to the right people, the right resources for support, along with being one of the many caring people in another person's life. I always try to provide a real safe and welcoming environment for my students. And that's achieved by doing things like having consistent classroom rules and supportive language and positive messages around consequences. I also try to develop a sense of our classroom, so students are partnering together and supporting one another throughout their educational journey. I try to be really transparent with students and let them know that I respect their confidentiality and ensure that they are always firmly in control of how and if and when their story is shared. I try to support different choices and voice in my classes. For example, I'll provide a menu of options for demonstrating an understanding of specific learning outcomes. This can include things such as perhaps writing an essay or creating an oral presentation or maybe developing a project. I also frequently conduct an inventory of my various assignments by noting each assignment and thinking about potential stressors or perhaps alternative options for students that might be helpful. And to this end, I really try to only use high stakes, high stress assignments when absolutely necessary. So I feel like by supporting and helping others, along with recognizing the responsibility that we all have, we can all kind of hope and encourage each other and also try to be a lifelong learner when it comes to trauma education. Thank you so much.
That was a great wrap up, Matt. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Matt. Yeah. That is, those are all the examples we wanted to share with everyone. I'm not sure, this is again another, just like more specific quotes and examples from the book related to mentorship. Yeah, this is our final segment. Do any of our listeners have any questions or anything any of us presenters can clarify?
I can ask a quick question.
Yeah, go for it, Tanya.
So I know that this book was written more for the K-12 educational system. I was wondering what kind of conversations you had about applying it to college. I mean, you obviously have, but did you have to get creative in the ways that you applied it to more adult learners?
I think we had to get creative. I think it transitioned really, really easily. And I think it's partially the one place off the top of my head, the one place where I feel like there was a lot of K through 12 was in her examples, but in the overall discussions, what she said applied to any level of teaching. I don't know, that's what occurs to me at the top of my head. Her examples were often K through 12, but the larger framework was applicable in our case as well.
And I would add the same thing, Tanya, is that the principles that were displayed, that were talked about were universal. You could really see it across the board.
Nice.
And honestly, I agree. I think obviously the examples were geared through for K through 12, but they were actually really useful for someone who doesn't teach K through 12, because I'm like, oh, like these are the things teachers, are seeing. These are because they were once our students, right? That was them 6 years ago, and now they're with us. So I found it really insightful, if nothing else, to be like, oh yeah, like our students are coming from these environments that are potentially more punitive, more outwardly like zero tolerance. And so it was really helpful in that sense.
I ask in a way, just in case somebody wants to read the book on their own, and not be part of a learning community like you had, would it be easy to make these kinds of applications? So it sounds like the answer is yes.
Yeah, absolutely. The only thing I remember reading about where I was like, oh, I'm not really sure what that is or how that applies. She was talking about some like trauma checklist that some K through 12
ACEs,
schools, ACEs,
Yeah.
have their students fill out so that they have some record of what the student's background is from a trauma lens. She's very critical of this checklist, as I'm sure you can imagine. But that was just one of the only times. But it was actually really great because in in the book club that I co-facilitated with Jessica, we had a conversation with somebody, Didi actually, who has experience like working with that particular checklist, and she was able to tell us what it was and how it's been used in places. And yeah, I remember thinking it's like really helpful to know that our students have sometimes been just sort of asked their trauma history and then marked down on a checklist and then put it in their student file. So it was actually really enlightening, even though it felt so disconnected from what we do here. It wasn't at all disconnected.
And what I would tell you is that ACEs use quite a bit in the medical field.
Oh,
they
it
use
is.
adverse childhood experiences. It comes up quite a bit. So what they do, at least in health professions, they ask you, be aware that your students may be experiencing things that you have no idea about. So I'll give a funny, it's not really a funny example. What I was thinking was kind of funny, but I had a student, I did a presentation at the very end. I taught a capstone course. And at the very end, I had them do TED Talks. They had 5 minutes exactly, but a lot can happen in 5 minutes. They were just stellar. And in one of the TED Talks, one of the students got up and she talked about her time of being a stripper and how she made it through school being a stripper. And of course, I was thinking something in my head that was a little kind of funny, but I didn't ask the question. And then she turned to me and said, Dr. Lee, you said this was a safe space. And no one in that cohort knew this about her, but she talked about going through the judge, having a boyfriend who had done some horrible things. And she said to the judge, if you give me a chance and don't put me in jail, I'll change my life around. She came to nursing program and she did change her life around, everything. But they look at that ACEs piece, the adverse child experiences, to say that so many of our students and maybe even people we work with have gone through some atrocities that we have no idea that infect them. So as opposed to being trauma informed means, as opposed to saying, what is wrong with you, is I wonder what happened to you, and always realizing that whatever they're giving back to you is not about you, it's about what they've experienced. So it's used a lot.
Thank you.
But not a checklist, but just being aware that everybody's experienced trauma in their life.
Jessica, I think I saw your hand up. Are you still here? Are you still with us?
Yes, I am. Thank you. And thank you everyone for presenting. It's really great to hear how you've all applied sort of the various framework in your class. And so one thing I wanted to bring up, and it's something that I've sort of received pushback on before, was related to sort of this quote unquote late policy. And I would love, insight or conversations more about that. But I've received pushback on the sense of, it's great that you offer flexibility to your students, but in the quote unquote real world or in their jobs, they may not be given extensions for a project, or if they're late to work, that could cost them their job. And so I haven't, really had a huge sort of I don't know. I'm not sure how to necessarily respond to that, because I do want to offer the flexibility, and oftentimes, we have to remember that life happens. And so I'm wondering if anyone, has any ideas on how to respond to that, or if they have any thoughts on sort of this idea of, well, we're not preparing our students, for this real world situation.
That's a great question, Jessica. I've gotten that same pushback from some people. Like, it's not a frequent pushback, but some people do get that. I don't know, Catherine, you were talking about late policy.
I was thinking of you too, Catherine.
I remember that was Catherine pretty much had.
Oh,
That was her, it said K on it. No,
that's Katie.
Oh, it's a mouth.
Oh, can you hear me
Oh,
now?
there she is. There she is. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I hit a mute button by accident. Okay, I'll start over. Okay, great question. I think for me, it comes down to this idea of how do we equip our students to effectively communicate, right? And gain some tools along the way. And so for me, it's often a conversation, like if it's a one-time request where a student needs, flexibility, right? That's usually not a big deal. If it starts to be a pattern with students, then I have a different conversation with them, right? And really talk to them about, yes, I know life happens, and I'm really glad that you're being proactive. What I've noticed, though, that you have a continual pattern of needing additional time. Can we talk about what barriers are existing to you getting work done on time, right? Because I think that really opens up a conversation to help them think about, is it time management? What is it in their life, and what can they control and what can't they? Because then I do frame it as, in other areas of your life, there might not be as much flexibility, or there might be some different expectations. So how do we help you develop some skills, whether those are communication skills or other life management skills, that will help you manage those things effectively going forward? So I really see it kind of in a couple of ways of showing some graciousness and flexibility and understanding, and also helping them understand that they might also need to develop some additional skills as well to help them be successful going forward. So I wanted to offer that as kind of my perspective on it.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And I've done the same, where students, if they've asked for multiple extensions, or the extension time period is more than a day, it's like going into several days, where I'll ask them, hey, let's meet and talk about what's going on. And oftentimes it is time management, and you can sit down with them and come up with a plan for how they're gonna get back on the schedule for the course. Maybe there's some assignment that they can skip based on dropped assignment policies, or to get them back on track. But I also just think people who say that the real world is not flexible are wrong. Like, when we have full-time jobs, we get paid time off. We can ask for extra time for things. People show up 5 or 10 minutes late and nobody gets mad at them. So the idea that when they get into the real world, every single thing in their life is going to be strict and there's not going to be any flexibility is also just, from my perspective, it's not true. And there probably are jobs out there where it is really, really strict. So I don't want to discount that possibility. Like nursing.
Or like surgery or something.
Surgery.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Surgery, yes. Please be on time.
Right. But fortunately, none of our students are going into surgery tomorrow.
No.
So they still have time to build these skills before they get there.
Yeah, I think it's relative to like where students are in their lifespan, right? Most of them are a lot younger, so they haven't had as much experience as we have as like professionals. So yeah, right. And they're coming here to learn. So I think I approach it similar to Catherine. And also there's an accountability piece, right? Like if you do sit down with them, make a plan, and they don't follow through, then then they don't get the points, or they aren't able to submit that assignment, right? So I think people that ask that also have this idea that there are no quote unquote consequences. But at the end of the day, yeah, like if it's the last day of the quarter and nothing's in, then there's nothing you can do. And they understand that, right? And hopefully that is still a learning experience for them.
Yeah, and that's such a good point. It's not like we just let our students do whatever they want and there's no consequences. We're just giving them, extra time when they need it for something. but still holding them up to high standards. Yeah. Matt.
I was just going to add briefly, just a quick comment, which one thing I think about a lot when it comes to this topic is the principle of assuming positive intent and understanding that life happens to people and trying to give people the benefit of the doubt. Again, like Catherine said, you're looking at patterns of behavior. Is this a one-off thing? Is this happening every week when an assignment's due? But trying to have students understand and express this to them as well, and I do this as well, is, I'm assuming that you have positive intentions, you're trying to follow the calendar, you're trying to get assignments in correctly, and look at the big picture behind this. If they do have something come up, that you show them empathy and flexibility and grace, and you move forward from that. So I think it really reflects in how our students connect with us and how they feel about the classes and the professors they have, where you can be someone that it's a delicate balance, but someone that's flexible, but also shows care and concern about the student's success. Thanks.
Yeah, the balance is really important.
Yes.
And it's hard to find that balance, right? And sometimes the balance, it like shifts depending on what else is going on. So
That's a good point too.
yeah.
All right, any other questions or any other reflections from our panelists today? All right, well, thank you all so much
Thank
for
you so
coming.
much for listening.
We will reach out to everyone. Do we need to tell us who's here?
Oh, no, we can save the Zoom
Okay,
thing.
perfect.
Yeah, but yeah, we will send out the PowerPoint hopefully. And yeah, if any of you are interested in doing the book club fully with us, we might offer it next year.
Yeah,
So
so thinking about
just-
offering it next year. Let us know if you're
Jessica, we might
interested.
ask you to co-facilitate again. But yeah, just keep your eyes peeled if you do want to read the whole book and have some of these discussions together, and then workshop your own, content or policies or anything like that.
Yeah, and for anyone who came in a little bit later or who missed it in the chat, there are copies of the book in faculty comments if you want to check one out to read over the summer. I don't know if they let you take it for a whole summer. You'll have to work it out with Tanya.
Yes.
All right, thanks everyone.
Thanks,
Have a great rest of your
everyone.
week.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks.
You bet.